right. So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the third of a series on conversations on leadership and equity with our Lead Boston alums. My name is Adriana Rains, for those that don't know, and I have been with YW now for 6 months, but have been affiliated with them for about 8 or 9 years. I'm very excited and honored to introduce you to Attorney Sheriece Perry, who is the Director of Court Services and Law Libraries for the Massachusetts Trial Court's Office of Court Management. In this position, Sheriece provides statewide oversight of the court services and law libraries. Prior to this appointment, she developed and managed the Boston Court Service Center. So she actually created it, managed it, and takes care of it. And it was one of the first court service centers to open in Massachusetts. And I'll let her tell us later what are court service centers. Furthermore, and there's a lot to say, so I'm going to resume it. She served as the president of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association. Most recently, authored a Boston College Law Review article titled Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Catchy Slogans and Buzzwords with Little Proof That They Matter to the Legal Profession in Massachusetts. So as we can see, she also says it like it is, and we love that. Sheriece graduated from George Washington University and Suffolk University Law. And when I have told people that she's going to be here and that we're going to be sharing this, they said, oh my God, she is a powerhouse. She is an unstoppable force. So I am very excited to welcome her, and I will pass it over to her so she can introduce herself, and then we can get started with the questions that I have. Please feel free to put any questions, comments, emojis, whatever you want in the chat, and I'll get to them. So I will pass it over to you, Attorney Perry.
Hey, thank you very much. I started to lose my voice over the weekend, and it's coming back, so I apologize for the raspiness. But thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Lead Boston was such an incredible opportunity for me. I met a lot of exceptional people, many who I still keep in contact with, either through Facebook, text messaging, or LinkedIn and those networks. And I've certainly tried to give back to Lead Boston as much as I can, as well as to talk about my experience to those people that are interested in it. And we've always been good about having trial court personnel there. So, I have been practicing law for about 15 years now, and I am a mom. I have a 13-year-old daughter. So this year we'll be looking at what's high school looks like for her. I have been with the trial court for 10 years now as well. I had some time at Bunker Hill Community College, and I'm on a number of boards now. I was recently on the Judicial Nominating Commission. I served 1 year, and I've kind of paused that for right now. It's an amazing experience, but it certainly has been a lot of work, and having 4 boards at one time seems to be a little bit overwhelming. I'm also serving as a trustee on the Board of Trustees for Roxbury Community College. And this year I had the amazing opportunity to chair the new president search, which I had never done before. And so I was happy that both the interim president as well as the chair of RCC entrusted me to lead that with retired Judge Leslie Harris, and we now have a new president at RCC. So certainly something I would have never thought. And I also serve on the Boston Finance Commission, which is a governor-appointed commission. And we look at how the city of Boston does spending and things like that. And then lastly, I am on the Access to Justice Commission, which is through the Supreme Judicial Court. And that really aligns with the work that I do, focusing on access to justice, self-represented litigant populations. How do they access our court system? How do we make our court system more user-friendly, whether it's through the court service centers or the law libraries, or wayfinding, or notices and forms and interpretation and translation, and I've really focused a lot of my time supporting that specific demographic. And it's been great that we did this massive, massive expansion of 33 staff in one fiscal year. The legislature supported the efforts, and we have doubled in size. We will now be able to double our operations and really serve the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. A lot of hiring, a lot of focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, ensuring that my staff represented the demographics of the people that we serve. And, it's been a long year, but, there's a lot to be done, and I don't want to answer all the questions. So that's really my opening for me.
Thank you so much, Sheriece, for that. I'm here wondering as I hear you talk, like, how do you handle all that? But, we'll talk about that later. I wanted to know, and some of the, people who register also ask, how did you become involved in the field? I mean, you went to law school and then you decided that you were going to go into a field that's more about creating equity, justice, and accessibility.
Sure. So what I would say is, we always talk about the importance of networking and relationships and staying in contact. I would have never found my way to the trial court in general. I think that the perception, particularly for, communities of color, is that the court isn't as welcoming, right? It's really hard to get a job in the trial court. Nepotism, favoritism, I applied for jobs in the past and it was like, you're not qualified. And I'm like, criminal justice major, took the test, like things aren't making sense to me. So what happened was when I graduated from law school, I worked for an exceptional attorney, James Dilden, and I spent a couple years with him. And family law was really what I had developed a passion for during law school. And one of my law school colleagues was working at Volunteer Lawyers Project, and she let me know that they were looking for a staff attorney in their family law unit. So I had applied, and I had not expected to be applying because at that time, I think I was probably about 4 months pregnant. Yes. And so I came in and I had taken the job very early into my pregnancy. And, I came back and I worked and I spent my time there. And I think because I was spending a couple days a week running court clinics, both on family law and guardianship, what I would see is that many people were coming up to our table and asking questions. But because we're federally funded, we weren't able to answer any of the questions or provide service. So, I had this moment in which I was like, I wish there was really a place and a space and an opportunity to create just legal information. I mean, sometimes people were asking basic questions like, how do you serve a motion? What is a motion? How do you prepare for court? What is, service of process? What's a return of service? A lot of the basic things, but people were hitting roadblocks, right? And so as my time as I was there at Volunteer Lawyers Project, I realized that I really wanted to spend a lot more time practicing. And so that was kind of what I was looking at. How do I get more of the litigation and legal skills? And I had another friend of mine from law school reach out and said that her husband was doing the public interest leadership program, PILT program at the Boston Bar Association, and that the court had been creating these court service centers. And there was no real thing about what they looked like or what they were going to do, but they were hiring for a manager for Boston. And so she said, based on all of the things that you've done through law school, always public interest, et cetera, this might be something you're interested in. So that's how I got there. And I think they had a particular plan to only hire 2 people. Had certainly talked with Judge Harris and other folks and said, I have this interest. And went to the interview and they ended up hiring myself as well as another attorney. And that attorney came with the experience of helping and creating self-help centers in California. But I think, when they looked at who would run Boston, they found reason to hire both of us at the same time instead of hiring one. So, in both of those circumstances, it was really my colleagues from law school that both reached out in different circumstances that said, this is something that I think you would absolutely love and be interested in. And I took a chance, and that's how I started. So when they said start a center in Boston, there wasn't a blueprint. I think my experience in Boston, growing up in Boston, being very well entrenched in the community, and my 3 years at Volunteer Lawyers Project and seeing what the needs were for Suffolk really kind of was like, I know what a center needs right now. How do I get the resources? Lots of cold calling people and saying you need interns, you need volunteers. And I really leaned on Vanessa, who's down in DC now, to kind of say, what are the logistics of running one of these things? Like, what are the parameters? What are the things that people need? And, I didn't build it by myself, but I relied upon the clerks and the offices and administrative offices and so forth. So that's kind of how I landed in the court. And, I think that I just had a vision for what I thought that they should look like. I don't make decisions on my own. So it was really, as I created more centers across the Commonwealth, it was, what does that community need? Who works in that community? What are the resources, community resources, DV clinics, food resources, a lot of the resources that people need, right? People don't walk in with one legal issue. Oftentimes they have multiple legal issues, and then they have non-legal issues, right? Some people may be dealing with issues with the Department of Children and Families while trying to secure their housing in the land court, while also dealing with non-payment of child support from a non-custodial parent. And all of these things could be happening to them all at one time. So we're talking about trauma, we're talking about missed work, we're talking about economic issues, we're talking about food insecurity and so forth. So that's really kind of what my vision was in creating centers, is making them a one-stop shop, and then leaning on staff and local resources to really inform what every location looks like.
Thank you for sharing that. That gives us all a better view of what it is that was created. The gratitude that, that it was created, because obviously you saw that there was a gap, that there was a need from the community, and thinking about how overwhelming and intimidating it can be for individuals who are not familiar, with the court system and how court processes work, the lingo, the documentation. So, wow, very a historic initiative that you and your colleagues put into place, which I'm sure has benefited and impacted many individuals and families. So I just want to say thank you for that. Thank you. Let's move on. How do you address, and even though it was in everything you explained, because that was sort of the purpose of creating these help centers, law clinics, but how do you address systemic racism and gender inequity in that work, in doing that work? I know you talked about having a diverse, team, but, like, what are your specific ways that you can mention that you are looking at is, through an equity lens, we are building this?
Correct, sure. So, I'm a data person, right? And so what's really always really important is that we maintain really good data. And it evolves over time, right? You start collecting a lot of data. You start to kind of change it and rework it and so forth. And ideally what was important is there's a lack of trust of governments and legal systems by many people, particularly those that have been targeted, marginalized, disenfranchised, those who come from countries and cultures and communities where their governmental systems are corrupt, right? And so understanding that initially there is angst to walk into a courthouse, right? If you are undocumented and you are experiencing egregious treatment at home, whether it's from your landlord, whether it's from your partner, people aren't going to the court system, right? And so what's very, very important is to create safe spaces. And so our goal in the centers was, one, to create safe spaces. And so we always ensure that, one, when people walk in, do they see people that look like them, right? Do they see people that speak their native language? What can we do to ensure that we can provide native speakers of different languages and dialects once they walk in? Do we provide interpreter services? The trial court for many years had not, right? And oftentimes people would be turned away because they didn't have an interpreter physically with them and they had no means of communication, right? That's an awful circumstance to walk in, need a restraining order, need to address abuse for yourself or your child, and then be told, no one speaks English, if you don't speak English, we can't help you, right? So that was initially the main thing, was what do the staff look like? What do the interns look like? What languages do they speak? Where are they from? What is their sensitivity to people from different cultures? I always, during interviews, would say, this is a no judgment zone. Absolutely. I had the no judgment zone before Planet Fitness had the no judgment zone. But I've truly and honestly wanted people to feel safe. And I wanted people to be from communities as well, right? I spend a lot of time. You can find me at a basketball tournament. You could find me at a local YMCA. You can find me volunteering with young people, right? And so then what happens is they develop a trust, and then they come and they find you, right? When one person comes to, we find that many villages and communities will come. People will then come and get help, and then they will go and they will tell their friends in the neighborhood and come and get help. We also go to the community, right? So that means cultural centers. We have a huge plan that we're working on over for this fiscal year, now that we have all this staff, is to go into the community and break that that wall and that barrier that people have with our court system, right? And so that's immediately initially what we're looking at. And then, diversity, equity, and inclusion runs the gamut of all different underrepresented populations, right? And so we have people that have different pronouns that when they come in, we have people that have different gender identities and gender orientations. That was also equally important. We just had our major meeting on June 28th. And so it was really emotional for me because when I started 10 years ago, there were 3 of us. And when I looked in the room, although we had about 5 people missing, there were like 55 people. And it's heartwarming to see that we have come so far, but when I look in the room and I know everyone's personal identity, it was heartwarming because we know that there's so much that we can do to address a lot of these barriers. Although COVID for some was challenging, COVID for us made life a lot easier because, one, we had interns in Boston that weren't available in Springfield and Greenfield and Worcester and other communities. Now we can share interns. Now, if there's a Cantonese speaker or in Boston, that person can now provide the services to someone that's in Greenfield, and people aren't transported, right? As I always talk about, what are people's barriers to access and justice? Sometimes it's transportation. Sometimes it's taking time off work. Sometimes it's childcare. Sometimes it's economics. And we think about all of these things when we figure out how do we run a center, right? We ask people, we're open from this period of time, right? 8:30 to 4:30. Some people are getting off work at 1. We'll give you an appointment. We'll send you the Zoom information. We'll serve you at the time that best suits you. Because again, this is about helping people access justice. And we have found via our data and our anecdotal data, just when you give people and you meet people where they are, they show up, right? When you tell them, we'll make sure that we have an interpreter for you, there's a sigh of relief. When you call into the call center, you'll often see Haitian Creole, Portuguese, and Spanish speakers on video remote. We used to just do phone. Now we can see people. And that, that angst, that stress that you're having as you walk in, you don't really know what to expect. But we're meeting people at every place and space that we can possibly think of. And then we look at our data and say, what are our unmet needs? What populations are we not serving? So we have two populations that we're looking at. One, incarcerated population. So it's always great when people come in and they're being interviewed and they're like, I came from, a correction facility. I have interest in working. Great. There's a couple other people across the state. We're trying to put together some work. We have an intern this summer that speaks Vietnamese. And so, the Asian community is another community that's been very, very difficult. Even when I was at Volunteer Lawyers Project, Greater Boston Legal Services was the only place that provided legal services. So, what can we do in the center to do some targeted outreach for them? Do we need to go to, Malden? Do we need to go into Fields Corner? Asking our Department of Research and Planning, what can you tell me about language access requests for Vietnamese, Cantonese, and Mandarin? And what are the case types that they're asking for, right? Can we start to see what are the areas that they really need help with? Is it housing issues? Is it family life? Is it domestic violence? Is it paternity issues? Is it child support? Like what are the issues? And how do we then change what it is that we're doing? So I think, big picture wise is always thinking about what communities and how we serve them, and then who on my staff are the best to provide those services. And when we bring in interns, we have tons of them. They come in and they do this stuff for free. Every semester, we turn them over. Sometimes they stay for a long time. Sometimes they stay with us forever, and then they go off to law school and then they graduate like Autumn did. And so, there are relationships that get built through the process, but we always make sure we maintain connections. And I'm always looking at who does what so I can figure out who's the best person and what teams can I put together to address the folks that are coming in with those areas, because I like people to be one-on-one, and I like people to feel more comfortable working with people with common interests and common experiences, because I find that the trust of it is developed much far better than you do.
Wow. There's so many things I can touch on that you just said, but I'm gonna have to process this and think about it for later, because I had no idea, first of all, how extensive it was, the building these help centers, where people for court services, where people that are accessible. The part that really stuck with me is when you talked about, we know there is a fear, a distrust, of governmental agencies. So the way that, knowing that, you mentioned you have to go into the community. People have to see you in the community. It's not just, I'm going to build a nice office here to help people and I'm going to post like, we have multilingual, attorneys, we have this, but because the building itself being associated with the courts, it's intimidating to people. So going out there and saying, no, we are the court, here we are. And we want to gain your trust. We want to, it sounds like you were like, what are the gaps? What is missing for people for them to be able to do what they need to do? You're not asking for, major things. You're just asking for what is every other person takes for granted, that it's English spoken, that you will understand their culture, that you will understand how they perceive whatever crisis they're going through, so having that community presence is something that I totally agree with for any field. It doesn't matter, if it's the legal field, the health field, the education, the foster care field, whatever it may be. So I appreciate that. And I'm still in awe of everything you've done and everything you continue to do. Would like to touch up on the data part too, because we don't really know what is the impact of everything you're doing if we don't collect data, whether it's quantitative data or qualitative data is how we, I think it's how we enhance our services, because it's a dynamic process. You do it, okay, this is serving the population that we serve now, but there might be an influx, of another demographic. Okay, now we need to make sure we're serving that demographic also. It's thank you. I will say thank you for the, for lending this world your creativity, and your ability to have a vision and make it come true. So thank you for that. Now, how I know you said it at the beginning, but how has your participation in the Lead Boston program, how do you think that impacted your leadership and your work?
Sure, I think one thing that was really important is kind of a lot of the different principles that you learn and develop as you go through the program, right? You know, some people are kind of born leaders and they just have this, knack for leadership. For many, we develop these skills throughout the process. And how do we approach conversations? How do we approach group work and so forth? And I would say that Lead Boston was very eye-opening for me because it forced me to look through a lens that I had not always, looked at. I had a very small job, right? For me, I have one small center in Boston that I'm working to create. But in 2018, when it was time for me when I did my program, right? So now I'm kind of going to rate myself a little backwards. But in 2018, at that time, I had so many leadership things that I was working on to kind of grow as an individual, right? And so, when I'm looking at all of these different sectors, what I appreciated about Lead Boston was that every month was something else. And when, for many of us, when we're in the legal field, we're very much in the legal field and we don't often do anything outside of that. Mm-hmm. And so when we have programming that is around, geography, and when we are focusing solely on criminal justice, while I had taken that in college and I worked for the trial court, much of my work has been on the civil side, which is your high volume side, right? Creating efficiencies around housing and probating family court, where you see many people. Criminal law, you see people with representation. How do I help people that can't afford an attorney, but equally deserve access to justice, right? And I have to self-represent. So, spending time in that field, spending time in health, I hadn't done any work in health. And so when you start to look at all of these individual sectors, I then started to kind of realize how overlapping our worlds were, but how inequities existed in the same ways with the same population of people. It was education, it's, healthcare in the legal field. We're so similar, but people often see us so differently, right? There's issues related to maternal health. There's issues with getting access to records, not having treatment, right? Inequities in how you provided services and treatment, getting access to information that you need, medical malpractice, things that are impacting low income, underrepresented populations, undocumented populations, communities of color, LGBTQ plus populations, transgender populations. All of these groups of people are experiencing the court system, education, and healthcare, housing, discrimination in the same exact way. And so what it did is really just open my eyes a lot more, but really gave me a different lens to be able to, how do I then approach people, right? I didn't walk into the job realizing that I needed to look at all of these issues, but in 2018, having been at the court at that particular time for 4 years, having now started to fold myself into creating more centers across the board, I realized that I needed to broaden my lens and perspective about what people need and how to serve them. And then 2 years later, we have a pandemic, right? And people need access to the court system. People need help doing court forms. So if your court is closed, then you have a 40-page guardianship packet to do because a parent died of COVID and they have 3 children and you need to do 3 guardianship applications. How do we serve grandma who's at home with 3 children that's trying to bury their child while a court is closed? Right? That's the dilemma. And that was real life for us. So my brain was, how do people get services? How do we change what we do? What are the things that we need? What are the IT resources that we then need to put together to say, people are having medical crises, but they have a legal issue that they have to address. And what are the steps that I need to do to make it so our system can function, right? So Zoom became the thing for us. And taking our in-person and creating a Zoom platform in the same way someone would walk in. What does Adobe do? Adobe makes forms fillable. And I think the major thing that was done was I asked the Supreme Judicial Court as they were trying to figure out what rules to change. I said, people do not have printers at home. Oftentimes they don't have computer. Statistics tell us most people access resources via their smartphone. So they're not signing documents, they're not doing that. And so I asked the Supreme Judicial Court to issue an executive order that allowed for my staff to electronically sign and submit for documents on behalf of court users. So what that did was we took a verbal affirmation that the paperwork that we had completed for them was right, was accurate. We would send them an email copy of it. We would keep records of what we did and how we helped them, right? So data, right? I could go back now and I know what staffer helped you, Adriana, submit your guardianship paperwork, right? If there was ever a question. But what that did was that completely eliminated what we were calling the digital divide at that time. And, you know, I think just life, I think that my experience understanding what happens in all of these different sectors and different fields all came coming back to me, you know, from that experience and spending time, you know, when you're in Lee Boston, you're talking to people that you've probably never met.
Yes.
That are in all different fields, you know, so
Yes.
spending time with the doctors and spending time with those that do housing, and realizing how people present, you kind of just take your experience and say, how do you take life and turn it and twist it into a legal processes that ensures that people get access to justice. And that was really what we did. And digitizing and creating sign-in sheets and all of those. I mean, I have an exceptional management team that just everyone powwowed, everyone had ideas. I was open to all things. And I think that what Lead Boston taught you was, you know, you've got to lead with trust, you've got to lead with confidence, you have to lead by being present, and lead with an empathetic bone and allow your staff to also lead and to bring and open up a place and a space for them to know that they have ideas. I want to hear your ideas. I want to figure out how do we put together a plan of action because I'm not an expert in all things. And you really learn a lot of that in Lee Boston is kind of step up, step back, allow people to speak up, encourage people to speak up, ask people for their opinions if they have one, validate people's opinions and thoughts. And then ultimately, you know, you have to make a decision as the, you know, the head of the team, but collaboration and partnership and coordinating efforts. I remember some of the projects that we did, it was like, we have a problem, how do we solve it? And everybody had really great ideas and we all came from different worlds and different lenses that we look at life because, you know, that is the nature of being human, that is the nature of being from different places and spaces. But I would definitely say that the partnership and the building of that played a huge part in kind of how do I now fix a huge problem for the court service centers. You know, the law libraries were exceptional. They were doing in-person and remote already. So they just kind of was like, we're closed, but hey, you already knew. So law librarians were light years ahead. You know, those are my brilliant minds in terms of like legal resource and information, but we were brand new. Court service centers were just born in 2014. So taking all of those skills and putting them together and saying, how do I execute? You know, I think was great. And, you know, just to wrap that up, at the same time, I was also serving as the president of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association, right? And I was wrapping up that term that April of 2018. But, you know, having spent time, you know, being in this, having this leadership role, just focused on how do you move forward an organization that focuses on, you know, Black lawyers and Black law students and Black judges and diversity specifically in that space. You know, I'm learning through all of these experiences all at one time to then hopefully, you know, prove exceptionally valuable later on in life when, you know, the world changes and, you know, I'm faced with a variety of different things and applying all of the skills that I've learned over this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm as we can see, talking to Attorney Sheriece would be something that we could do like for days, just sit on, you know, in a table, because there's so much there's so much. So I want to, because again, I want to be mindful of time. If Noreen or Kira, if you have any questions that you want to ask, before, before we close out.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking a lot as you were talking. I worked at Metro Boston Housing from 2007 to 2014. And I know from the affordable housing world, it was all families, you know, not exactly like family court stuff. But yeah, there was just nowhere for them to ask questions. And there's Greater Boston Legal Services, but like nobody could ever get in or hear back. And I'm always like, I'm a social worker, I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen enough that like they can't discriminate you on Section 8, and
Yeah.
this is the type of things. But yeah, I always felt like there wasn't enough kind of people to go to with expertise that you felt safe. So I loved, like, as I was wrapping that up, the, you know, court services came on, like you were saying, in 2014. And then now, since 2014, for the last 10 years, I've been working in foster care and adoption at Bridges
Yes.
Homeward. So a lot of our own staff are guardians or foster parents or trying to adopt. And yeah, the courts, like the backup in COVID, like my own coworker who's adopting, she's a single woman adopting a brother and sister from foster care. And it's been years and years and years. And she's like, you know, you just don't, the court is such a mystery, even like people who are doing the guardianship. Like we have a lot of grandmothers, you know, we have a sibling group of 5 trying to get a grandmother. So it's just like, yeah, it's just me talking, but I love the work you're doing. And I think that's so important. And I agree with you in terms of Lead Boston, in terms of just kind of reminding, I mean, me to like state the obvious to my staff where like I feel like I need to solve people's problems. And Lead Boston was a good reminder of like, admit the obvious. You're like a middle-aged white woman. You don't know all this stuff about diversity, equity, inclusion. Like you need to listen to staff and get their input, and you don't have to be the solver. Like you can be the lead collaborator, I guess, from the YW stuff. So I found that super helpful. So a lot of my role was leading the diversity, equity, inclusion, and people obviously looking at me being like, who are you to do this? Like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I'm nobody. I'm just like, want to be part of the solution. And now I do a lot of advancement work. So I'm writing grants, and where you were talking about the BC Law Review article, or Adriana mentioned it, you know, it's like, yeah, all these like code words, like writing a grant, I'm like, diversity, equity, inclusion, I need money for training and stuff. And like, I'm trying to figure out like, how do I, you know, what do people want to hear that fund you? And then what do you really want to do with the money to like get the training and the support and ongoing? It's like, you got to like, think of like, talk the generic talk that people talk, but know like on the ground what you want to do with it. So trying to figure out how to get diversity, equity, inclusion stuff funded in terms of like foster care and adoption work. The state contracts only pay 80% of what we need. So I'm doing a lot of fundraising for the other part. And then DEI stuff is always seen as like, oh, that's like extra. But like for foster care and adoption, it's the same as the court service. If you don't have staff that look like the people that speak the same language, that understand the culture, you're going to go in with your own ideas of how they should parent their children. And so it's really important, the diversity aspect and the understanding. We talked a lot about microaggressions at my office. And of course, like half the people are like, I've never heard of that. I don't know what you're talking about. And the other half are like, we experience it every day. So it's like just kind of getting everyone together to grow. So thank you for talking and for letting me be a part of it.
Thank you. I mean, and you know, the other part of Lead Boston is, you know, you meet people, right? That come from different, and you know, spending time in the community and also meeting a lot of people, you find that you can offer a service, right? We have never publicly advertised court service centers. We have brochures, we're on the website, you know, clerk's offices know, and every court service center has, you know, resources and has relationships locally, right? So Taunton, for example, is our newest court service center that we're developing now. But one of their major roles, because we have nothing in the South Coastal area past Brockton, and it is meet with people, talk to people, identify. And so what you end up doing a lot of times are meeting people and then saying, we have a center. I didn't even know you had a center. You have a place where I can send people that come to me. So for you, Noreen, like identifying where there is a court service center in your community and then saying, you know, having a meeting with one of the managers, that's their job, you know, that's their role, is really how do I meet with people and how to identify? We have lots of repeat customers, but as we've been starting to do these pop-up clinics throughout the community in random places, what's happening is that we have new court users that didn't know about the court service center. And so now we can start to focus on more outreach and going, and now the managers can. When you only have a staff of one manager, one staff attorney, and interns pre-pandemic, it doesn't make a lot of, and you're open 5 days a week in person. It doesn't give you a lot of room to get out in the community unless you're doing it on your free time after hours. And you know, mindful of my staff have families and children and their grandchildren, and they're going to college and they have lives, and we want to make sure that you create the appropriate work-life balance. How do we incorporate training? You know, we had vicarious trauma, de-escalation, and self-care during our most recent training. So we always include, you know, that part because it is important. You know, when you are passionate, and you, as an attorney, and you're passionate on whatever role, you will pour from the driest cup that you ever have because you love what you do, you love the people that you serve, and every day you wake up to do that. But you realize that sometimes you don't realize you're not doing self-care. Sometimes you have to incorporate that. Sometimes you have to do it as a team. And what is actually self-care? There are some things that people haven't identified. So we did like self-care bingo and some stuff on there I probably would have never thought was, personal self-care, but it is, right? And so making sure that it's not just all work and focusing solely on work, but letting people do the things that they're interested in, letting people serve on committees, go into the community, meet people with programs. And that's really a lot of it, right? So when I meet someone that's like, oh, I'm in, Ludlow, and I'm like, oh, that's Worcester community. All right, let me connect you with my manager out there, Chase, so you can, schedule some time and maybe you can create these direct referrals, which we love too. Recognize that when you pass people on one, by the time you get to the second pass off, the person's fallen off and they're never going to do what they plan to do.
Yeah.
So we like to do soft handoff. We like to know what they need. We like to send an email with permission from the court user. Suffolk University Law School does Rogers clinics. Are you comfortable with us sending them an email? They'll reach out to you directly.
Are the court service centers only family, related questions like guardianship or?
We do family. So within family law, it does include guardianships, but the guardianships that are filed in probate and family court, not in juvenile court, right? We have a whole host of, so guardianships of minors, guardianships of adults, restraining orders, harassment orders, name changes. We have housing related issues, so TROs, we help with answers. We help people understand conditions issues that they may be facing. Small claims matters come up a lot, security deposit issues come up a lot, neighbor issues. So civil side of pretty much all things, we do, but our highest volume are probably divorces, child support, child custodies, and guardianships on the family law side, and then, the conditions issues, landlords not paying, fixing things, a lot of the things that people don't always see. And the numbers on debt collection is like 95% default. And, that group of folks haven't really figured out how to get people to respond to these credit card related issues. People get served that they owe, $5,000 on a credit card. They don't show up. They get a default, right? These defaults then show up on their credit reports. And what happens is then people need to do certain things with life. We need credit, right? Where our system is capitalistic. And so things sometimes people don't realize are happening in the background. But, that's another area that is it's a met need, but they haven't solved the issue of how do we get away from 95% default. But relationship building, direct meetings and communication and contact with community organizations and getting into communities is very much what our focus is now for this upcoming fiscal year. Now that, we have the staff being in the court 5 days a week right now. We're only, we were 2, then we scaled up to 3, and then we'll be 5 starting in September. So now anytime you walk in, our signage, making sure that's updated. most people don't use websites, but we do make sure the website is updated. But, you know,
Yeah, that's good. I'll
Okay,
share it with
good.
my staff because I know when I oversaw home base and raft programs and homelessness prevention, it was very much we'd like be in like Lynn Community Service Center or different places to connect. Because yeah, people don't know it's there, don't trust you unless sometimes you're there. But the virtual has been super helpful. So yeah, I'll definitely want to share this with my staff because I'm wondering if my staff can like, help connect them to your agency, like either I
That is
would
the
say, oh, I'm
first-
gonna email,
that is
yeah,
exactly what Lead Boston is about, right? Meeting new
yes,
folks and
yeah,
we figure out how do we help each other, right? How do
Yeah.
we help each other do the work that we can do? So absolutely, I have my information. You can contact me whatever, whatever community you're working out of. I'm happy to make a direct connection with my manager. But I mean, I think
Okay,
that
yeah, we're based in Cambridge, but it's all over Greater Boston, and we have like adoption cases like in the Cape, which I don't know if you have a service center there, but like if a grandparent or a family member is anywhere in the state, we're up to like make the connection so the kid doesn't get stuck
our
in foster care.
virtual court service center is our call center. So our call center answers calls, 5 days a week. And their goal is, our back to data, but just very quickly is, we track people by their zip code, right? And we don't have a uniform court system, and I'll tell you why. So people, when cases are done, it's based on venue, right? And the venue is usually where the child resides, particularly in family law cases. So if one parent has a child and they live in Greenfield, but the other parent lives in Brockton, right? The case is going to be litigated in Greenfield. And although the law is the same, sometimes the processes, the scheduling, things like that, not going to be the same as Brockton versus Greenfield. So while I have a court service center in Brockton, parent number 2 needs help. If you call the court service center and you said your case is out of Greenfield, the Greenfield Court Service Center would be the one that would help you. But what I can now look at is I can look at the Greenfield Court Service Center data, and I'm going to have all of these little pins all over the state of Massachusetts. It could be people that need help in Greenfield might live in Vermont. They might live, they could be in upstate New York because people are transient. We have people calling from all different countries as well. And that's why we track where are people calling from. But specifically in Massachusetts, it helps because I can then say, you got a lot of people that live in a certain area that have cases out of this area, and they now have to get services. If we didn't have a virtual service center, if we did not have Zoom, if we were still fully in person, someone would need to go from another part of the state all the way to the county that serves them, because that location's gonna know what they do. We didn't do phone either, because the lines of people walking in the front door. So Zoom changed the game for us, not only staffing wise, but for court users that ordinarily would have had to travel, and travel is a barrier, can now call the center, know which center is going to help them directly, and be served via Zoom, even if they're just on a phone, be served via Zoom. And it just made all of the connections that we absolutely needed. So it was a game changer. It was certainly a game changer for us. So now we can do all things, and provide those assistance. And one community that we started to work with is the deaf and hard of hearing community. You'd be amazed what those earbuds are doing to people's ears, and how much of the population may not be clinically deaf, but are hard of hearing, right? And they need closed captions. When we first started with Zoom wasn't always available via closed caption. And how do we meet them? We had a court user that was deaf and spoke Arabic, but could read and write. So, our goal was making sure that we couldn't provide the ASL interpreter all the time. However, because they could read and write, we used one of our interpreters that provided the translation. So they would translate the emails back and forth for us and the court user to provide the assistance that they needed. So again, what do people need? What are the resources that we have? And if we don't have the resource, how do we figure out how to meet them where they are, regardless of their circumstances? Because everybody deserves that assistance.
Thank you both so much. Noreen, thank you so much. I'm gonna reach out to you separately because I like to speak with you, because that's one of my really things that are in my heart, foster care and adoption. And then I will have a follow-up email and share Sherice's information if you want to connect, because like she said, that's the purpose of this, that we make connections. Somebody said they were a dot connector, and that's how I see Lead Boston, that we don't have to go at it alone. I am gonna let Attorney Sheriece be the one to close us out, but I wanted to add before that as things get progressively worse, for us, the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, et cetera, that doesn't mean that our work stopped, because our work has been in existence since before DEI was a thing, so it's just a matter of we continue to do, because this is about making sure that every single person has, the right to justice, to fairness, to equity, which is not the same as equality, that we're meeting people where they're at, to be able to best help them, which is everything I heard from you, Sheriece. It's like a constant, okay, where's that community at? How do we meet, their needs? How do we go to them? How do we, so it's always about them, because that's what it is. So, but I am going to let you close us out, Sheriece, whichever way you like. And we are extremely grateful and to continue this conversation in the future.
And so thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It's always great when I can share, what progress has looked like for me over the past 10 years and the growth of an exceptionally innovative program, in a system that I think was uncommon and not where people thought growth would be, and where the court service centers would be. I think what has been an important part of this role is, one, having great relationships with your colleagues and the people that you meet. When you hear of opportunities, sharing them. I am a perfect example of what happens when my two colleagues know what I'm interested in, not even at that moment, but just they heard of an opportunity and they share it with me. Having judges and folks that I've met throughout my law school experience, being able to have them support me as I go through the process, understanding the importance of mentors and allies, and having really great relationships. And I think, being kind to people, I talk about this all the time, whenever, particularly when I talk to young people. Life has a way of humbling us sometimes, and you start off one place, and 10 years later, you're meeting people that you hadn't met in so many years prior to. So kindness is really important. Honing your skills and learning. I think life is also about learning. And sometimes we get to a point where we don't feel like we're learning anymore, but always being interested in learning new things and meeting new people and developing new skills, particularly during your first 5 to 10 years of whatever your career is. Yes. But I think it's really important during the early 10 years of your career to really learn as much as you could possibly learn. Be teachable. I spent a lot of times with interns and go through the interview processes, and even in the role on the judicial nominating commission is, being teachable, being self-aware, being self-accountable, being helpful, being kind, and just enjoying life, taking care of yourself. I don't think we've talked about that enough. It's important to also take care of yourself, knowing when you need to take a break, taking your break, taking your time off, spending time with family, spending time with children and grandparents and distant relatives, the person you keep saying you're going to call and you haven't called them back. Life could be here today and gone tomorrow. And I think we experienced what that looks like during the pandemic. And it's really important to just kind of take that time and be passionate about what it is that you're interested in, but also taking the time to hit a plateau and pouring into yourself and doing things that you love. So I thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I am always accessible. for my lead Boston community. Even more so accessible now that I've checked off the box on a lot of these huge initiatives.
Yes.
I'm always a resource and always want to make the Court Service Center as a resource, particularly for those that are working with the public that need access to the judicial system. So,
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm sorry that we wasted all your, your vocal cords. I hope you have some honey or something, and we will continue this conversation. Thank you everyone so much. And we will be sharing this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.